So we've now had some, I think, really helpful presentations, getting an international perspective of how this has worked out in another country, another European country. I think we can explore some of that a bit more. How it might impact on the home care market and what the home care response might be to this. I think it's an interesting piece. How we avoid building bridges in the wrong place and how we wind up with investment not actually delivering the sort of transformation that we might want to see. And I think the important message we've had from the regulator, from Ofcom, that this is not something that's never going to happen. This is an inevitable part of change that is going to happen. So we now need to be really making sure we're motoring in terms of planning. So I'm going to just see if there are hands at this point of people who want to contribute with either comments or reflections on what they've heard from our presenters, or indeed what they've now read and digested from the white paper we published. We have people with microphones. Can I just see any hands at this stage? Right, okay. In that case, whilst you're mulling over, I wanted to just start with a question to our colleague from Sweden and just get a bit of a sense from you. A very public sector shaped and led programme that you told us earlier that it was the local government that sort of really framed quite a lot of the procurement around all of this. I think one of the things we're interested in the UK is how we finance this transition. And I just wondered if you could say a bit more about what role government, local and national was playing in Sweden to deliver that.
I think looking at the Swedish transformation that was made from a financing perspective, I would say there was no special financing done for the digital transformation. I think a key driver for it was the change in business model, making it possible for councils and regions being able to buy it as a service rather than a huge capital investment, buying a lot of alarms or social care alarms, etc. So I think that was the main driver and making it possible for the Swedish municipalities to actually do the change over time and buy it as a service. And I think from our perspective, we share very much the picture that's been painted here by the other presenters as well, in where we see sort of technology taking care in the future. And of course, technology will enable new kinds of services, making it a lot better for the end users, for the municipalities, for the entire sector. And I think this sort of buying it as a service will be an important part of that as well. And I think that's what we see in Sweden now. They are, as we said, the contracts are typically 2 to 4 years in length. And when those contracts expire, they have the opportunity to sort of go out and procure something different if they want to. And basically they hand back what they had for 2 to 4 years and they procure something different. And I think, or I know where we're going now, and as the SKL I spoke about, and looking at the next frame agreement that will be out 2019, that's the plan, then they will include more and more, if we call it the IoT type of care services as well, and include that in their framework that municipalities will tender based upon as well.
And I think that's very helpful in terms of what we can learn in the UK as we go through this journey, not necessarily just following your journey, but actually finding ways in which we can, in a sense, use the opportunities around the Internet of Things. I think it's really interesting. I wanted to just pick up on the TSA's own costings, because we've come up with this figure of between 150 to 300 million as being the estimate of the sort of cost to manage the transition and mitigate risks and so on. Steve, could you just say a bit more about how we've arrived at that figure and maybe the further work we've got to do to sort of nail that figure down with government and others?
So that figure was described in the white paper as a set of worst case figures. Where it came from was if you took the, 1.7 million end users of social care. I think the number came from take 1.5 million of that, the dispersed users in people's own homes. Take the typical purchase cost of a unit, halve it because we'll do a wonderful procurement deal, but need to add to that, you know, £1 or £2 a month for a SIM fee cost. When you work your way through that for 1.5 million users, you get to £150 million. I think the 300 was on the assumption that we weren't quite so successful in negotiating a wonderful procurement deal. But nevertheless, that was a worst case. I think Hugh touched on this, that in reality, we need to work our way through what is the actual likely impact on the ground. I mean, I know we're talking 14, 20% failures already. It may be that all those alarms are affected, but ultimately we'll have to do some robust testing and get a real costed scale for that. I do have one concern with that world, I guess, which is, we've already said this is quite a complex environment, complex network. We've already had examples where problems with connected devices come and go. You know, you've got changes in the networks and they work one day and don't work the next and so on. We've also not really tested these under aggressive situations when you've got high loading. You know, that day when 1 million people are downloading a Great British Bake Off episode is going to put a lot of load on the network, and we're not quite sure what that's going to mean to other devices' connectivity. So I guess what I'm saying is testing and proving what's good and what's failing is going to be tough. So I think that's probably one of the hardest pieces to navigate. So yeah, that's the worst case set of numbers. Hopefully it'll be less than that, but it's going to be a significant proportion of the estate.
And I guess, Hugh, I mean, you were nodding quite a bit in response to the points that Steve was making just now, but it'd be useful to get some sort of sense of, as you've said, Q1 next year, we may see some more detail coming out from Ofcom. I think one of the key things that is a message in the white paper is the need for maximum transparency about the intentions, the timetable, and so on. How can Ofcom ensure that we actually get that from all of the telecom infrastructure providers?
Well, that's a challenge for us as a regulator. We are already, as I indicated, in discussion with the key players who are undertaking this transition. And broadly, I don't think there's any dissension from the fact that they understand they've got to make this transition as transparent as possible. Yeah, the question is, they're in different stages in terms of their planning. They have different timetables. So whilst they're all happy to communicate them, the question is, when are they going to do that? And the reality is it's going to vary. And consequently, there's quite a complex message with a varying approach to transition, starting at different times, finishing at different times. And the question is, how can you bring that together into a coherent timetable that people can understand? And that's not a simple process. The reality is the pace will not pick up, I don't think, until at the earliest, we're talking about the back end of next year, the beginning of the year after. So the reality is we've got some time to try and consolidate all of those different timetables, different strategies into something that is, I won't say clear and easy to communicate, but at least is intelligible. And then agree with industry about the responsibilities of individual players, about how they make that message known at what point to what group of consumers. And I think that's all doable stuff, and I think that's really something that we are taking on board and looking at through the work that we're already undertaking. The question is, when can we go public with it?
And I've been told there may have been a hand go up in the room, which is good to know. There's a hand over here. Anyone else? There's another hand over here. So for we'll come to you second. So.
One at the back as well, Paul. And
there's one over the back. Where's the hand? There's a hand there. So we'll start with you over here, then we'll go to number one, and then we'll come to this gentleman here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in terms of the 8-year period between now and 2025, obviously providers at the moment will be replacing equipment, so presumably they're going to be replacing equipment with equipment that's potentially going to be obsolete. So at what point are the manufacturers going to be providing equipment that will actually work on the new technologies?
And I'm going to take the one up here, and then we'll get the response to the two, and I'll direct where it seems appropriate to get an answer. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I was quite alarmed at the sort of casual reference to failure rates, and I wondered what is the acceptable level of failure rate for this industry?
Okay, I might direct to a couple of people. So first question was really, at what point will manufacturers be providing the sort of kit that means that you're not buying obsolete equipment in the first place. I'm going to ask Steve maybe to pick up on that one. And I think probably there's a response possibly from Carl on that as well. It'd be interesting to get your perspective on that. And then I think the other question about failure rates. It'd be very interesting to hear what the sort of rates of failure were in the early days of the transition in Sweden. And it would be very interesting to hear from Hugh how we really make sure that is, what does the regulator think is an acceptable level of failure? So starting with Steve. And then I want to come to Steve and Simon with something else I want to ask you in a second.
Manufacturers, I think we've still got quite a fragmented state. So you've got some providers who are already well positioned. They're already delivering products and systems and services which are IP enabled or digital, and others are not. I think we're a little bit like we've got different timescales for the telecommunications providers. We've got the same thing with some of the manufacturers' estate. So I don't think you'll get a fully clear answer to that question until another year or so goes by. In other words, another way of looking at it is I don't think you're going to get all manufacturers being in the same state for a little while yet. But I guess watch this space. There is a very interesting side effect as well to this, is that the systems all don't look the same. And what I mean by that is I don't think we as a community can say we're going to set this very specific prescriptive standard for what people supply, because they do look different. You know, they connect differently. Some use cellular connections, some broadband, some both. They've got different characteristics. I think we have to be quite smart about how we as a service provider community want to specify that sort of technology. Maybe we need to be more agnostic from the solution and specify to service level, which comes back to things like failure rates.
And from the Swedish perspective?
I would say, one, there are sort of solutions out there already. Just looking at Sweden, for example, where everything that's provided today is a digital solution. So evidently, there are suppliers out there today with digital products. And we are one of them, but we have competitors in Sweden as well, unfortunately. So there are other suppliers with digital devices out there as well. And I think, as we said during the presentation, it's hard to predict the future. So we don't know what's going to be the right sort of devices and models for tomorrow. And without trying to sound like a broken record, but once again, I think this looking at it as a service again, another benefit of it will be actually not being, you will not be in a situation where you have invested a huge amount of money in something that might not be the right solution 3, 4, 5 years from now. Then you're on a service model, so you buy a service, and then if that hardware today is a digital telecare alarm, if that's something else 3 years from now, then it will be replaced to something else because you buy a service.
And that, I think, connects to the sort of point you were making, Steve. I mean, how do we start to reframe this so it's not about the box, it's about the service and the outcomes it's delivering?
It starts by looking at what the risk the service user is exposed to is and what the outcome is they want to achieve. And I think if you keep that front and centre for the whole time, you don't get distracted by this idea that somehow there will be a box available that will give them the solution they want. It'll vary from individual to individual. I think that the idea of a service wraparound, whatever the connectivity issues are, whatever the box is, whatever the device in the house, and that could range from digital televisions, Amazon Echoes, smart watches, smartphones, smart meters. There's a whole variety of different things that we could take data from. It's what you do when you get a signal that says, I need help, I've fallen, or whatever else. And it's, I think, concentrating on the service wraparound rather than the physical bit of kit is the way to avoid the problem where you end up with the wrong bits of kit in everybody's homes.
And Hugh, this point about failure rates, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I would if I was the relevant regulator, but I don't think I am in this context.
So you think it's the Care Quality Commission
well,
who are the ones who should be answering
precisely,
that question?
go back to that previous statement. Yeah. What we're talking about here is that end-to-end service. The telecommunications elements of it, and they'll vary, are just one element. It's the overall failure rate on that end-to-end basis that you need to be concerned about. Now, clearly, the telecommunications infrastructure can't evade responsibility for some elements of that. And certainly, I think we are clear that we are talking to the communication providers to ensure that whatever bearer services that are being provided are as reliable as possible. There is an issue here that fundamentally goes much further than that, which is about that end-to-end service and making sure the message gets through and is acted upon. And I think consequently we can do a little part of it and facilitate discussions through industry to make sure that the bearer services are reliable as possible. But that's part of that broader picture. And as you say, the the relevant sectoral regulators need to look at this on a joined-up basis.
Yeah, thank you. And this is very much a point from our report. There's a question up at the back, and then we need to get a microphone to the gentleman down here, and these will be the last two questions. So I don't know where the other microphone has gone, but we'll take the question over here. Yeah, at the back there.
My question builds on the Telecare is dead, long live Telecare by Steve. And thinking about the Blockbuster example and the typewriter companies, they didn't need to invent new technology. They needed to adopt what was happening in the big marketplace. And maybe we need to be thinking less about the technology that we want to develop just for a small sector. I know it's big to us, but it's a small in terms of the mass market. And maybe we need to be thinking more about aggressive, innovative adoption of what already exists and how we can make use of what already exists.
So I'm just going to get a response to that question, but before I do, I'm going to ask the gentleman who's now got a microphone to just put his question as well.
Hi. Obviously, at the moment, local authorities are sort of the main purchaser of telecare. Do you see a move or a shift to actually the consumer playing a bigger role, and actually the consumer sort of buying these products for themselves and it moving to more of that model?
And I think those two in some ways do have some links. I'm going to actually start with Simon, partly to sort of pick up on those two questions, but also then just to reflect, how do we make sure that the home care sector comes on the journey that this change from analog to digital might suggest as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think certainly in terms of the private pay idea, I think my view is that as time is going to go on, we're going to see more of that evolve, whether that's publicly funded but the individual has money to spend, or whether they're spending it for themselves. I think the pressure's there to start to drive that. So that will bring greater demands from people, and they'll want more services. And plus, we know, I think we all know that there are household names that are looking at, well, how do we actually support people to live at home more effectively, whether they're old, young, vulnerable or not. So I think we'll start to see that. I think Steve said some of these things are inevitable and they're going to happen, so we'll see some of that change. And in a market that, in effect, for a lot of people, they're private paying anyway. You've got millions of people that private pay for themselves in some form, some sort of care. Why would it be different just because there has to be some technology involved? But it wouldn't be. I think buying it as am I going to buy a telecare service? I think that's quite a hard sell, I would suggest, probably in the sense of how that is.
I saw one final hand here, so I'm just keen to, yes, there we go.
Hi. For those people in the room who are either providing services or commissioning telecare services, what can we be doing now to prepare?
Steve.
I think the key good question. I think the key first step is start to plan. I mean, one of my colleagues, I think, made the point that we're already buying equipment and systems now. Well, let's start to plan to procure those systems which survive the change, for example. So it's not a big problem at the end. It's a smoother transition. So I think having awareness of the issue, and we're hopefully a little bit ahead of the problem, is getting that plan. And this is where TSA has to take some responsibility to try and help you through that journey.
Sam?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective as well, are there simple ways to actually bring together what care are you providing day to day, as well as what technology overlays that to start to work those together, because at the moment they're very separate. And are there sensible ways to kind of start to bring that more effectively? And just going back to the earlier question, that I totally agree we should use existing technology that's already there to help enhance the services. I think as Steve was kind of saying, rather than trying to create something even more technologically complex.
Steve.
So to take the last question first, I think if you're a commissioner, commission for outcomes. Commission for outcomes. ask your providers to tell you what the result of the work they're going to do will be, not what the inputs are. If you're a provider, collect evidence that it's working, because that will enable you to argue the case for those who hold the purse strings, and any of you involved in local authorities will know the purse strings are increasingly tight, to go and argue that there needs to be investment in this sector. And if that investment gets spent in a way that balances investment from the public sector with the private sector growth, or more people paying for themselves, then more people will get the benefit. If it also avoids the trap of trying to create the answer all the time and instead leverages things that are already out there, like Amazon Echo, like people's smartphones and all the other devices that we've talked about today, then you can imagine that this kind of scale and pace objective that was set for the sector years ago, and we've been talking about 1.7 million connections for the last decade, you can actually start to see a tipping point, that it starts to become natural for people to have something in their home, and it might be in the background, and it might not be the primary purpose of the device, but it's managing their health, and it's making sure that they're looked after when they need it. And I think if we can get that effect, if we can engineer that effect as a sector, that will secure our future.
And we do it in an empathic way. I mean, that video earlier on I thought was incredibly powerful. Carl, any advice as well?
No, I think it's a lot what's already been said. I think start the transition already now. Don't wait. We know that there are going to be sort of other type of services, other types of technologies, etc. tomorrow. But as long as you're on, so if you start your digital journey, you will be able to evolve and expand as you go. You won't be locked down in sort of this one solution forever. So from that perspective, start now, and we will see different kind of devices, services coming into this as we go. And I think we will have an opportunity to be much more flexible in what type of care, what type of devices, what type of services we deliver to different people based on their needs and based on the requirements they put on. And I would also urge you to put demands and put requirements on the suppliers, because the solutions are there regardless of what they're saying. So be tough on them.
And Hugh, finally from you.
Well, I think that I'll reiterate that last point. This is not bleeding edge technology. There are a lot of existing building blocks that can be leveraged one way or another, whether it's as a dedicated solution or whether it's part of a broader capability that consumers have already got. And leverage that, take advantage of that, and do it as quickly as possible so that you don't continue to deploy solutions that bluntly have got a very limited shelf life.
So that's the debate the white paper has started. The white paper isn't just about starting a debate, it's also about providing tools and support for you to be able to make this journey. I hope you found this panel discussion useful. I hope you found some of the insights and challenges that colleagues here have presented today helpful in terms of thinking about the journey. It's not just a technical journey. It's a journey about what sort of businesses you want to be, what sort of service models you want to have in the future, and in some ways, whether you want to be the disruptor or whether you want to be displaced by the disruptors. And I think that's the choice. I just put up on the screen again, if I can, the last slide that I started with earlier. We're doing a survey. Part of that is to explore your reaction to some of the messages we've been putting out today about this switch from analog to digital, the impact, your understanding, your level of awareness. Please do go on to the site there and give us your responses, and we'll share some of those findings during the sessions tomorrow. But can you now show your appreciation to our panel? Thank you very much.